We'll start with an article that came out yesterday afternoon, from the Ukrainian ambassador. All right, okay, we can already guess what he's going to want to say and advocate for. They've not the first time he's had articles presented in the media, so it's not necessarily anything new, but it's the latest example of, I guess, hard press on Ukrainian interests. But the point I've been making over the last several weeks is the public awareness, the public tolerance for ongoing conflict in Ukraine. It's falling out of the public mind. The public have stopped caring about it. Most places around the world, seemingly. So he's going to use rhetoric. He's going to amp things up and sell things from the Ukrainian point of view. So illegal invasions. Okay, cool. It's intensified. Moscow's bombing of Ukrainian cities consists of up to 800 murderous missiles and drones. All right. 800 missiles and drones. Cool, got it. Civilian deaths have risen in turn. It's a conflict. Things are going to... If you stick to rhetoric like this, well, whatever you have to say that's important later on is going to be diluted by the fact you've already spent your shot. Mixed metaphors again. So the Australian Prime Minister and Foreign Minister stated on 24 occasions that Australia stands with Ukraine in the past year. Yep, empty words from empty politicians. Not a surprise. Australia's also signed up to the Coalition of the Willing in support of Ukraine. Not telling anything new there. However, in the past 12 months, by contrast, the Australian government has made no new contributions of any kind to Ukraine, be they military, humanitarian or reconstructive. In fact, not even the delivery of the full complement of the pledged 49 M1A1 Abrams have yet been achieved, despite the commitment being made in October 2024. Okay, so I'm not 100% sure about our ability to on-sell or on-gift the Abrams. Generally, military hardware received by Australia from the US has very strict third-party sales limits or on selling. Yeah, now the fact it's going to Ukraine probably means that was probably granted, but the point still stands that it is unlikely that we had a license to sell them, give them to whoever we wanted. Second part is, we're on the opposite side of the world. There are other nations with Abrams and well, Leopards and Challengers and most other modern MBTs that are much closer. They can just push them across the border and give them that way. The idea that they're reliant on our MBTs being flown in from half the world away. I've got no idea what we're replacing the M1A1s with. They're only relatively new for Australian capabilities. So, now the Bushmasters, yeah, okay, they're MRAP type mobility vehicles that, okay, I can see Australia selling them. I think they were like Australian developed based off, I got the feeling it was like a South African design initially. I mean, most MRAPs seem to have South African heritage in them somewhere. Don't get me wrong, Ukraine and the president are very grateful for the tanks received and the $1.5 billion provided in aid in 2 years. Grateful for the government stated solidarity, but give us more money. It is difficult to understand why substantive support has been paused at a time when Ukraine needs it most. Okay. Now this guy's getting, I won't say he's deluded. I think there's an unwillingness to look frankly at why support is evaporating or why people have stopped caring so much. Yeah, you've had your opportunity. It's gone now. Sorry. Not nice to hear. Regrettably, there's a growing gap between the rhetoric and the reality of Ukrainian aid. Now, this isn't just an Australian thing. This is everybody who's promising things or saying things like this. Yeah, no, and I've been saying this, that there's this split appearing, and not just in public support. And then these are, you look at things like this, and they're markers, they're indicators of what's coming down the pipeline, or what's likely to happen, of direction people are going to go, of like, oh, we're promising all these things, but you look and there's no delivery. You're like, there was no support really, was there? There was no intent to deliver that aid. You said it for political grandstanding, did nothing to help the people dying in the mud. Quite obviously, you don't care too much about it. Therefore, the idea that Ukraine's got this universally supported position, no, the reality doesn't show that. And so when I'm saying that this is idea that the best negotiating position that Ukraine has got was yesterday, well, was actually several months ago, but it is not improving. It's getting worse, irrespective of random people on YouTube and the media claiming otherwise. The reality on the ground and the reality in what's being delivered is very, very different. So he's the ambassador, so he's obligated, well, okay, so Kiev's now finally receiving some bomb damage. Maybe they can feel what it's like in the Eastern Oblasts, after 2014, but hey, whatever. He said, the situation is particularly difficult to understand in the context of two economic aspects. First being the significant spike in global commodity prices, which improved Australian. So in other words, you guys get more tax, give us more. We're responsible for the commodity prices going up. Give us more of that take. Nope. That's extortion. Ain't going to happen. So basically he's claiming that because the Australian government budget has improved. Hasn't he been listening to my articles about lack of infrastructure and support and difficulties with welfare and systems in Australia? Nope. Obviously he's Ukraine first, but he's telling another nation that they should put Ukraine first too, over their own people. Simple maths that show for every dollar of war windfall, no, wrong term, revenue Australia has received, mere cents have flowed back to Ukraine. So there you go. They're taking credit for higher commodity prices, and therefore they deserve the money. Yeah, wrong. Second respect, Russian-derived fuel products continue to be brought into ports around the country by Australian fuel importers. While Australia has sanctions on Russian crude, there's a well-utilised loophole by which Russian crude is laundered through third-country refineries, including in India and China. Okay, at which point, okay, it's a no secret that China and India and Brazil, amongst other countries, are continuing to purchase Russian petrochemical resources, oil and gas. Hell, even Europe was buying it directly. And in fact, it's going to be a very cold winter if they're not longer paying for Russian gas. But that you've then taken this product and refined it into a second or a third product. Okay, now you're starting to stretch things a little. Okay, I get his argument that just because it's a refined petroleum product, i.e. motor oil, petrol, heating oil, whatever, that because its origin was Russian, you should sanction those commercially prepared products as well. I can see his point on that. The reality, though, is I don't know that that's going to work necessarily. I mean, it wasn't the money isn't going back to Russia unless they've got some sort of licensing. But Russia got paid for the fuel already, for the oil and gas already. The fact someone else has then processed it and turned it into something, well, you're a bit late on that. So yeah, he's claiming it's laundering of oil. The result is Australian consuming industry and perhaps the ADF have never consumed more Russian-derived fuel than they do today. Despite global sanctions, Australia is the world's largest single-country importer of Russian-derived fuel products. Be nice to see some evidence of that. Since February 2023, 1 year after Russia, fuel loophole has seen Australia send well over $2 billion in revenue to the Russian Federation. Well, it hasn't gone to India and China. I mean, by this guy's argument, you shouldn't purchase any Chinese products because the power and heating and components may have been Russian at some point, which equals the value of some 200 Kinzhal missiles fired by the Kremlin at Kiev. Well, the Kinzhals don't just go at Kiev, they go all over the place. Seems immoral. Well, this comes back to this whole idea of once you've picked a side and decide to support it or supply it over the other side, you're no longer an innocent bystander. You're no longer a neutral party. And we've seen articles where there's been legal justification given for attacks against infrastructure belonging to third parties. It seems immoral that Australia's payments to Russia exceeds its support to Ukraine. While the responsibility for the oil trade ultimately rests with the fuel importers, it's happening on the government watch. I remain hopeful the Australian government will recognise that the Ukrainian war is very much pertinent to security of the Indo-Pacific region. No, it is not. It is a regional conflict. It's sub-regional. It's a regional conflict. Now, the fact that there's many people all over the place providing weapons and everything else, you could say with validity that the Ukrainian conflict has impact in Europe, in the Baltics, in the Baltic Sea, maybe in the Black Sea. Really, that's about it. I mean, even Western Europe's sort of out of reach of it. I mean, Poland, yeah, maybe, but you're reaching at that point. Does it affect Africa or Middle East, South America, North America, the rest of Asia, or the Indo-Pacific? No. It's a regional conflict. As much as you might want to think otherwise, you're trying to make it into some sort of global conflict. No, it's not. How is it pertinent to security in the Indo-Pacific region? Now, the reason I could possibly see an argument for this would be if Ukraine is successful in drawing in more US hardware into the region, as in into Europe, to support its claims, bolster its support, etc. And in doing so, draw US attention away from the Pacific, which then gives a bit of a power vacuum for China to move into. Other than that, I don't really see it. I mean, China and India have been the regional powers for a while now. The Ukrainian conflict hasn't changed any of that and isn't going to change any of that, quite frankly. And no, it will not kickstart support for Ukrainians' defence and victory. You're deluded, mate. So he wants the petroleum importers and suppliers to guarantee they won't source in import products with Russian oil sources. I don't know. There's other significant measures Australia can take. As requested by NATO, it can contribute to the prioritised Ukraine requirements list to channel resources into the most urgent battlefield needs. Ukraine highly values the unique and effective Australian armoured vehicles like the Bushmaster and the Hawkeye. Hawkeye? Vehicles surplus to ADF requirements or new builds from production lines urgently requested. Ukraine seeks at least a pool of new Bushmasters to replace those destroyed in combat. I remember when the Bushmasters were first sent, It's like, oh, these were never going to be destroyed. Yeah, well, they are. In other words, demanding. Not every country. I mean, there's a lack of Western. Okay, not Western. Well, yeah, Western. NATO and other Western arms manufacturers are struggling to maintain the stockpiles that the nations need. It's one of the justifications Trump gave for not supplying Tomahawks, TLAMs, is that the US needs them first. There is no excess to capacity. And, I mean, you go and find honest reporting from various Western nations about their supplies, their native supplies of 155mm artillery and similar sorts of shellings and ammunition. Yeah, they emptied warehouses, and the manufacturing lead time to get everything caught back up. At the rate the conflict's going, there is some ammunition types just cannot be replaced. They cannot restock because the production rate is too low, and they can't bump it up any faster. So Australia can also join the 22 nations participating in the Demining Coalition and initiatives to strengthen Ukraine's capacity to clear landmines. I have a real issue with this statement. We covered it in one of the previous week's articles about the use of IRBMs in Ukraine. Now, it was given as a throwaway line, and I went and chased it down, and found a statement from the US Department of War about use of IRBMs by Russia against Ukraine for the first time. And in the bottom of that press release was a very short statement about how the US was providing anti-personnel landmines to Ukraine. And I thought, well, that's weird. I knew the US weren't signatories to the landmine treaty, to the mine ban treaty. I thought Ukraine were. That led to a bit of digging to find out that Ukraine had practically left the Ottawa Treaty. And not just that, they convinced a number of NATO nations, particularly in the eastern part of Europe, to also withdraw from the anti-personnel landmine treaty, the mine ban treaty. And you talk about how Trump's talk about nuclear testing is proliferation. Well, this is more scary proliferation. The proliferation of anti-personnel landmines. Now, anti-tank and anti-vehicle mines hadn't been banned. These are more anti-personnel mines. And so you've got, I remember Latvia and Estonia and I can't remember who else. But basically, Ukraine convinced them all to leave roughly the same time, August 2025. All right, but Ukraine had been effectively breaking the treaty since 2014. So from the time that the initial conflict with the Eastern Oblasts had begun, Russia weren't really a signatory either, but Ukraine were basically violating the terms of the treaty and then openly doing so and pretending it was valid and all okay. And it's like this proliferation. And now he's got the gall to come out and say, oh no, you need to participate in this demining coalition to strengthen capacity to clear landmines. You're the ones who left the treaty in the last 6 months. You're the ones who have engaged in a proliferation of landmines. No. Ultimately, we asked for a demonstration of the mateship the government has previously shown in practical ways. To that end, at the local cafe, airport, lounges, or sporting sidelines, I'm often reminded by regular Australians walking away from a fight is not the Australian way. Well, neither's extortion. There are some comments, most of which are vapid, blah, 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 blah support.